Okay, hello, how are you? Um, Jumping on live here today to have a conversation with people who are concerned about their gut, about their thyroid. So I love this, this is my jam. This is what I love to talk about. But let me tell you why I love this topic in particular. As someone who's had two thyroid autoimmune conditions, I had Graves' disease first and then Hashimoto's. And I've also had gut issues. I had ulcerative colitis in my 20s, and then just ongoing, all the typical gut stuff, the bloating, the discomfort, foods bothered me. As someone who has had both of those things, when I finally learned how they're connected and how they affect each other, it was like it was a gift. It was just like having such an aha moment. So I love talking about this. And my goal for tonight is that you really understand the relationship between your gut, your thyroid, why you need to address both if you want to really get better. Okay. So let me share my screen and okay. Here we go. Okay, so I put this little presentation together for you so that you can see, it says bloating, indigestion, constipation, whatever your issues are, if you recognize that your gut is not working the way it should be, and then how that's relating to your thyroid. And so what this picture is showing is that the thyroid affects the gut and the gut affects the thyroid, and we need to get both of them working better in order to feel better. So if you have been paying any attention to, wish that I could make this be a little bigger. Let's see. Oh, that makes it worse. Okay, hold on. Okay, so hopefully you can see that. If you've been paying any attention on the internet at all, you've been hearing about gut health, the microbiome, the saying that Hippocrates said all healing begins in the gut is something that people really bring up all the time. And so, what I think is so interesting is to realize right here everything that is inside your gut is technically outside your body because this is a tube that goes from your mouth all the way down and out the other end, right? And really, what's inside that tube is external to the inside part of your body, like your bloodstream, is really what I want you to think about. So, that's an important thing because things that enter your gut are really the external environment. And how much of the external environment do we want to let into our bloodstream? Okay. So, recognizing that, then 70% of your immune system lives inside your gut. And that part of it is actually called, there's a name for it. It's called GALT, or gut associated lymphoid tissue. So you probably know your lymph, the whole lymph system is really the immune system. The job of the lymph is to, um, you know, when you have an infection or anything that your body needs to deal with, it's the lymph nodes that go into action and they're located throughout your body. And so the lymph system is really important. And this is gut associated lymphoid tissue. So that's the part of the lymph system that's in the gut, and 70% of your immune system is there. And what is the job of that part? Number one is to store lymphocytes T and B. So T and B are immune cells. They're like attack cells. They're different types of cells, but they attack things that shouldn't be there. That's their job, right? So right there, those lymphocytes are present in the gut. And then the other thing that happens is the immune system there is going to produce antibodies against antigens. So antigens are molecules that the body recognizes as an invader. And when the body sees that, it produces an antibody to go after that particular antigen, right? So you may know from an allergy test that, an allergist will test you and see how your body responds to certain antigens. So your body will recognize things and go after it. That's happening in the gut because, again, that's an external environment. It's like an external tunnel running through your body, and everything inside that tunnel is not part of your body. Okay, so we don't want the things that are in that tunnel to be leaking into the rest of the body. That's where we start to get into trouble. Okay, so the next slide says that the gut health can trigger Hashimoto's disease. I know the top part of this is cut off, but I wanted you to be able to see this diagram so that you can see the relationship. So when you have low thyroid, so your thyroid is not working great, that causes inflammation. Or when you have inflammation, it's going to affect how well you're producing your thyroid hormones. So there's a relationship there. When you have low thyroid, that's going to affect how well your immune system can regulate itself. So when those T and B cells are being produced and the immune system is triggered, it's not only up to the thyroid hormones, but the thyroid hormones will affect how well that regulatory process happens. Okay, and then when your immune system is not working great, that's going to cause inflammation and damage in the gut. That's what the immune system does, is it causes inflammation. So the inflammatory cells go after, right? That's why you get a temperature. That's why if you have a cut, you get a red and hot area where that cut is. That's the immune system trying to handle it. But that can cause leaky gut. And leaky gut can affect the immune system. Leaky gut can affect inflammation. So we have this whole thing right here, where everything's affecting each other and vice versa. Okay, so that's where we start to see and understand, I hope, the immune system. Okay, so this slide says, when leaky gut happens, things leak into the bloodstream that shouldn't be there. So if you go back to, again, that tunnel that's running throughout your body, if there's gaps in the tunnel, if things are leaking through from inside the tunnel into your bloodstream, that's what leaky gut is. And I've done whole, lives and classes on leaky gut and how that happens. There's a whole bunch of reasons why that can happen. It can be antibiotics, it can be stress, it can be processed foods, it can be alcohol, it can be non-steroidal anti-inflammatory meds like Advil. So lots of things can cause leaky gut. But when that happens, things leak from that tunnel into the bloodstream and shouldn't be there. And that's where the immune system gets kicked in. The body says, oh, shouldn't be here, starts to have this continuous immune response because, things are in the gut all day long. Foods, you're eating foods that, if they're processed foods, they have chemicals in them. You're getting into contact with stuff all day long, and that keeps triggering the immune system. When you have an immune system that keeps triggering over and over, and that regulatory process is impacted, then you start to develop autoimmune conditions like Hashimoto's. So I'm relating this to thyroid particularly, but this really, in terms of the gut and the immune system, that's going to impact whatever autoimmune condition your body develops. It could be rheumatoid arthritis, it could be lupus, it could be psoriasis, it could be diabetes. There's a relationship here to any of those. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little more specifically about the thyroid, but for this part here, whatever your autoimmune condition is, here's a correlation to your gut. So we know that leaky gut is always one root cause for autoimmunity. It's a place where you have to go to work. Okay, so the thyroid hormones influence the junctions of the lining of the stomach and the small intestine. So those junctions are leaky gut. We want the junctions to be nice and tight so things don't leak into the bloodstream. And the thyroid hormones will influence how well those junctions are holding and keeping a nice tight lining and the integrity of that lining. T4 and T3 also help keep that mucosal border healthy. So the junctions are the actual cells themselves, and there's a mucosal border on top of that. And that mucosal, just like in your nose and your respiratory tract, there's a mucus lining. And the job of that mucus is to trap, germs and bacteria. And, it's just protective. So these thyroid hormones help to keep that mucosal border very healthy, so it's not damaged and maybe missing. And what's going to cause that to happen is stress from a lot of different areas. Yes, emotional stress, but again, all the other things that I mentioned before that would damage the processed foods, the alcohol, the chemicals, medications, things like that. That can, but particularly stress, which can contribute to ulcers. So right here we see that the thyroid hormones influence the mucosal border. So there's one relationship with the gut and thyroid. Another thing that's really important to remember is that you have to convert your T4 into T3. So when your brain tells your thyroid, "Oh, make more thyroid hormone," the thyroid is going to make T4 and T3, both hormones. It makes primarily T4. And this is how I think of it. It's like T4 has a better shelf life. So as the thyroid hormone is produced and it has to travel throughout your body, the T4 is going to last longer. So it has to travel and get converted into T3 in order for your cells to use it. The cells don't use T4, they use T3. So where does that conversion happens? 60% of it happens in the liver. And we'll talk about the liver in just a second. But about 20% or so, yeah, here it is, 20% of T4 is converted to T3 in the GI tract. So converting inactive T4, remember inactive because the cells cannot use it, into the active form of T3, 20% of that happens in the GI tract. And it does that in these two forms. So there's T3 sulfate, and then there's T3AC, or triiodothyroacetic acid. Okay? The conversion of T3 sulfate and T3AC into the active T3 that you need requires an enzyme. So the enzyme is called intestinal sulfatase, right? Sulfatase, enzymes are things that trigger reactions to happen. They cause a change. That's what enzymes do. So there's an enzyme that has to make that change happen, and it's called intestinal sulfatase because it happens in the intestines, okay? Where does that enzyme come from? It's actually made from the gut bacteria. So you need certain healthy gut bacteria to make this enzyme, or your body doesn't make the enzyme well, and then the conversion doesn't happen. So when you have dysbiosis is a good word to remember because that's on the labs that we do to look at gut health. When you have intestinal dysbiosis, what that means is an imbalance between the good bacteria and the pathogenic bacteria. Pathogenic means it's going to cause disease. So bad bacteria. So you want a good ratio between good and bad bacteria. The good guys, they do good jobs. They're very important. They create enzymes. They bring down inflammation. They do a lot of different jobs. And the pathogenic bacteria cause trouble. They create problems. They cause damage. They take over. They challenge the immune system, etc. So you want to make sure we're never going to get rid of them, but you want to make sure you have a good ratio. Okay. So when you have dysbiosis, when you have not a good ratio from good to bad bacteria, that's going to reduce the conversion of these two forms of T3 into the active form of T3. And this is one reason why people with poor gut function may have thyroid symptoms, even though your blood tests, your lab tests say your thyroid hormone is normal. So that is something that I hear all the time. I go to the doctor, they test my blood, and my thyroid hormones, he says, are fine. It's normal level, but I don't feel good. And the doctors, of course, don't want to up the medication because they see normal lab results. So they can't justify or rationalize increasing medications, but you don't feel well. You're still really tired. You have, all the symptoms of thyroid dysfunction. So this is one reason why, is that the conversion is not happening if you have bad bacteria and overabundance. Also, if the liver isn't working well. Okay, another reason why the gut and the thyroid are connected is that inflammation in your gut. And why would there be inflammation in your gut? Well, from all the things that we talked about that contribute to leaky gut. So if you're eating a lot of processed foods, if you have a lot of stress, if you certain medications, all of that is going to cause inflammation in the gut, and that's going to reduce your T3 because it's going to raise your cortisol. And cortisol decreases active T3 levels, but it increases the inactive T3. So that's the reverse T3. If you've, oops, sorry, I thought my microphone was going to fall. If you have had blood work done and you have reverse T3, we all have reverse T3, that's an inactive form of T3. It's kind of like the mirror image. So it looks exactly like T3, but it's reversed. And so what it can do is it can bind onto the receptor sites of cells where T3 should go. So now it's taking up a spot. It's kind of like musical chairs, right? If you get in that chair before the real T3 gets in the chair, now there's no chairs left for the real T3 because the reverse T3 is taking up all the spots, right? Cortisol does that. And inflammation in your gut is going to elevate cortisol. So gut health, very important there. Okay, another thing we want to look at is what lipopolysaccharides do. So lipopolysaccharides are cells. This is how I think of it. Might be a little bit simplified, but it's really like the poop of the bad bacteria that lives in your gut. So when you have that dysbiosis we just talked about, too much bad bacteria, the bad bacteria, they're living things. They produce waste. So that waste, when it leaks into the bloodstream, it forms the immune system forms a compound around it, and it's called a lipopolysaccharide. So those are not good things, and they negatively affect thyroid metabolism. So what do? Well, number one, they reduce thyroid hormone levels. So lipopolysaccharides floating around in the bloodstream due to dysbiosis in your gut, due to leaky gut that has allowed them to leak into the bloodstream, right? That's what's happened. That's how they end up there and why you have them. They will also dull your thyroid receptors on your different cells. So they reduce thyroid hormone production. They dull the receptor sites on the cells. They increase that reverse T3 we just talked about. They also decrease your TSH. That's your thyroid stimulating hormone, which is coming from the brain to tell the thyroid to make more hormones. So it's going to decrease that. So your thyroid's not going to be getting the message the way that it should. Oh, make more hormones. And finally, lipopolysaccharides promote autoimmune thyroid disease, Hashimoto's or Graves' disease. Hashimoto's tends to be a lot more common. So, but this is all of the things that the poop from bad bacteria in your gut will do. That's what this is. Okay, and that's what it will do. Other reasons why the gut and the thyroid are connected. Number one, if you have low stomach acid. So a lot of times people have acid reflux, bloating, that GERD, those GERD symptoms, and they get put on acid blockers. The thinking is, oh, you have too much acid, so let's block, the production of the acid. And usually it's really the opposite, is that you don't have enough stomach acid, and so the stomach is working harder and pumping out extra acid, and just that mechanism has like that burst of sort of, burping or the GERD or the bloating, things like that. When you have low stomach acid, so now you probably have low stomach acid to begin with. Now you're on an acid blocker potentially. But even if you're not, the low stomach acid also increases that intestinal permeability or the leaky gut. It also raises inflammation and produces an environment that can encourage infection. So the stomach acid is a big deal in terms of the gut health for sure, and then how it affects the thyroid. Another way that they are connected is when you're constipated. Such a common thing with clients that I work with. You know, it's just not a healthy environment, so it's not doing what it's supposed to do. When you're constipated, that can impair hormone clearance and cause elevated levels of estrogen. So the estrogen, we know, is important to clear whatever is extra that your body's not needing. You don't want estrogen to build up. And so if you're not going to the bathroom well, you can build up that estrogen. That's going to affect, specifically for this conversation, that's going to raise thyroid binding globulin levels and decrease the amount of other free thyroid hormones available to the body. So that excess estrogen affects your thyroid in a couple of ways. And then on the other hand, low thyroid, when you've got low thyroid, that's going to affect how well you go to the bathroom. That's going to slow down your transit time because you've got a sluggish thyroid. You're going to have a sluggish gut motility. So when that happens, now you have an increase in constipation, you have more inflammation, more infections, and you're not absorbing your nutrients well. And you don't absorb your nutrients, and the thyroid's not getting what it needs. So it's very cyclical. It's very much one hand washes the other. Okay. And then the other piece, which is a little bit not exactly the gut, but they work together. The liver and the gallbladder work with the gut to detoxify and clear, right? So if you have a sluggish gallbladder, that's going to interfere with your liver's ability to detoxify, and that's going to prevent hormones from being cleared. So again, we're going to have hormones build up, which is not a good thing, especially estrogen. And then that's going to impair the gallbladder function by reducing bile flow. That bile has to keep moving, grabbing onto the toxins that have been processed by the liver, moving through into the GI tract and clearing things out. So let me go back into here and just see. Okay. So I don't see any questions. So what I'd like to do is just pull up, if you understand now that relationship from the gut to the thyroid and how they affect each other, particularly dysbiosis, when you have good to bad ratio of bacteria, is not great. I just want to pull up a gut test so that you see what information we get when we run a stool test. Okay, so let's look at that. Okay, let's see. Okay, so here's a sample test, all right, when we run a stool test. So if you're remembering everything that we talked about, there's a lot of information on this test. I'll walk through it a little bit quickly, but I wanted you to see some important things. Number one, there's pathogens that are tested. So this person happens to have high C. diff. C. diff is a nasty bacteria that you don't want to become too abundant. We all have it, but when it becomes abundant, it really becomes a problem. It is a pathogen, so it is disease causing. All right, so Further down, we'll see all of the pathogens that this lab tests for, but this person came back with elevated C. diff, and that really affects the terrain and the environment and the microbiome. So that's important. We see that on this test. This part here, we see these are keystone species. So the keystone species are called that because they're really important. They play key roles. They really run the show in the gut, and they tell a lot of the other bacteria, the colonies. They give them information to, do their jobs and to organize. The bacteria are they work together as a community. So it's important to have these keystone species be at the right levels. So having too many that are low in particular is not good, right? So that's that dysbiosis. This is contributing to that we talked about. This lab will also, which is one reason why I really like this lab, is it will tell us the functions of your gut bacteria. So these are all the different things that we want the gut bacteria to do, and it will tell us whether the bacteria is doing a good job or not. And so this person has a lot of functions that are not really happening very well. So I want to scroll down so that you can see, here's just some graphs and where this person lands, but without taking a lot of time because I didn't really want to do a whole stool test here. But here's dysbiosis, right? Do you remember I talked about that dysbiosis is the ratio between good to bad bacteria? So this whole section of this lab test is going to look at this person's sample and how their ratio. So this is one family, Firmicutes. Bacteroides is another family of bacteria. It's going to look at the ratio. So it tells what that bacteria does. Here's the range that it should be in, and here's what this person is. And the next one, same thing. If it's in red, okay, it's not in range, it's below. 0.28 is below 0.35. So proteobacteria, actinobacteria, two important families or colonies of bacteria. This is what, it talks about what those bacteria do and then where that person is at. So we'll go through and the main categories of bacteria we'll look and see how's your ratio, what's it looking like in there. Okay. Now we're looking at the pathogens. So again, C. diff showed up. This is well above the top end of the range for C. diff. And that really becomes problematic for a person because that's going to cause disease in the gut. These are all the pathogens that this particular lab will test for. And these all have different ramifications for the body because what we know is different autoimmune conditions are related to different bacteria. So rheumatoid arthritis, we tend to see certain bacteria in people with rheumatoid arthritis. We tend to see other, Campylobacteria or Yersinia or, these are parasites, Blastocystis hominis. These are bacteria. H. pylori is a really, really big, important thing to know if somebody has, and you've to really make headway, you've got to clear it. So these are all the things that this test will test for in terms of pathogens. And then, it will go through and look at the functions, what the functions are of the bacteria and how well this sample showed up for each function. So for butyrate, for propionate, acetate, what does that do and where does this person land? Okay. So I just wanted to take a few minutes and go into that so that you could see that. Okay. So I don't see any questions here. I think that all I can see is if you're watching from my business page, which is Organic Health Journey, that's the one place that I'm seeing. It's streaming to several places. So if you're seeing this in other places, and you're writing comments, then I'm not able to see your comments. When I leave and I go and check those other places, if there are comments there, I will definitely respond to them. Okay. But I hope that you see how important your gut health is for your thyroid, how important your thyroid is for your gut health. You can do a lot to support your thyroid. You can be eating all the right foods. You can be working on your toxic load. But if you don't handle your gut health, you're not going to get better. You can work on your gut health, but if you don't, you get the point, right? So I don't have to go through that. Okay. So, and again, I kept this really about thyroid, but it does hold true for any autoimmune condition. We know that a leaky gut and gut health is one of the pillars of autoimmune disease. Okay, I'll tell you what the three pillars are. One pillar is leaky gut, gut health. Another pillar is genetic predisposition. So that's the one you can't do anything about, right? If you have the genetic predisposition in your family, that's what you've got. But that's actually the least important because you can really do a lot with all the other issues. The third, it's a three-legged stool, we call it. So the third leg of the stool for autoimmunity would be a stressor or stressors, multiple. So there's something that happens that causes that immune system to switch on to that autoimmune genetic predisposition. Something happens. What is it? It could be emotional stressors. It could be you're in a car accident. It could be you're a caregiver for a parent for 5 years. It could be a job that you hate. It could be chemicals and toxins in your body. It could be mold exposure. So some stressor triggers that immune system. You've got leaky gut going on. Okay, that is always one of the stools, and you've got that genetic predisposition. So we can go to work on everything to get that gene to be turned off and not expressed, to get the immune system to balance again. But there's multiple places to go to work. Okay. So I hope that that made sense to you. I hope that that gave you some information about thyroid health and gut health and how they relate to each other. And if you are struggling with your thyroid, I'm finishing next week the January session of the thyroid boot camp that I run. So it's an 8-week thyroid boot camp, and we work on the gut and the liver and the foods for the thyroid and detoxification for the body. We have weekly calls every week. We have very specific food plans to follow, recipes and menus. And what else do we do? Oh, and we use a 3-month protocol of supplements that help with bringing down inflammation, clearing the body of the toxins that we're talking about, improving gut health, all of that. So that's the thyroid boot camp. The next one is going to start in the week after next, the beginning of March. So if you want information about that, if you think that makes sense for you to help your thyroid function better, to help get your autoimmunity under control and to reverse a lot of your symptoms, I would love to talk to you about it. So just drop me a comment or reach out to me and I will give you the details and the specifics. But I'll be talking about the thyroid boot camp for the next week or so as we work on ending the one that we're just finishing and getting started for March. I can't even believe it that it's March. Holy cow, it was just Christmas. But anyway, yeah, so we will be starting that the week after next. Okay. So I'm going to look and see if there's comments anywhere that I can answer for you, and hoping you just have a great night. And if you're in my neck of the woods, you're under snow. So as is a lot of the country. So stay warm and I will see you soon. Okay. Thanks. Bye-bye.